King David faced many difficult situations in his lifetime, but nothing had prepared him for the storm that struck from within his own palace, forcing him into a life and death duel with his beloved son, Absalom. The first signs of Absalom's volatile nature surfaced in the aftermath of an event that took place in David's palace. His sister Tamar was raped. Furious, Absalom decided to take revenge on his brother Amnon, who had carried out the despicable act. He cunningly lured Amnon outside of the palace and murdered him in cold blood. The murder of Amnon sent shockwaves throughout the royal house. Absalom fled north to Geshur, and David banned him from the palace. But 3 years later, overcome by longing for his son, David consents to Absalom's return to Jerusalem. The reunion is sealed with a kiss. David's love for his son remains as strong as ever, despite his son's crime. But entirely different thoughts are running through Absalom's mind. The handsome prince appears in the streets of Jerusalem, dressed like a king. He rides a chariot with 50 men running before him and launches a campaign aimed to incite the people against David. Every morning, he arrives at the city gate and convinces the people waiting for their cases to be heard that so long as David is king, none of them will get a fair hearing. His solution: if only I were made judge in the land, then every man who had a dispute or case could come to me, and I would give him justice. When Absalom feels that conditions are ripe, he goes to Hebron, the city where he was born and where David previously had his capital, and proclaims himself king. Messengers spread the word of Absalom's revolt around the country as he and his men storm the palace. Within just a few moments, David's beloved son had turned into a dangerous enemy, threatening his life, his family, and the entire kingdom. David flees the palace, racing out of Jerusalem before Absalom can take over the city and kill its inhabitants. Here in Nahal Kidron, not far from the palace, David halts his convoy to survey his men. With him are the members of his household, his wives, his children, and a large number of loyal followers. Refusing to desert their king, they have all chosen to march with him into the unknown. From Nahal Kidron, they begin the steep ascent to the top of the Mount of Olives. David went up by the ascent of the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went, with his head bent and his feet bare, and all the people with him bent their heads and went up, weeping as they went. What was going through David's mind at that moment when the son he had raised and nurtured strove to take his life? Grief? Disappointment? Anger? Or perhaps he was thinking about his sin against Uriah the Hittite and Bathsheba, after which Nathan had prophesied that evil would arise from within his own house. Although David is shattered and hurting, the veteran warrior's instincts remain razor sharp. At the top of the Mount of Olives, he offers an emotional prayer to God and prepares for the counter-assaults. The first thing David must do is to delay Absalom. If Absalom attacks now, David's camp will fall into disarray and collapse. David must find a way to stop the anticipated attack on his troops. The solution presents itself at the top of the Mount of Olives, where he meets an old friend, Hushai the Archite. David solicits Hushai's help and sends him back to Jerusalem. His mission? To convince Absalom to wait for reinforcements and only then to attack. Meanwhile, Absalom has taken over David's palace. Now comes the decisive stage in the campaign, pursuing David and killing him. But Absalom hesitates. Should he attack David immediately or wait for reinforcements? As expected, Ahitophel, previously David's top advisor and now an advisor to Absalom, recommends an immediate attack. But this is where Hushai the Archite comes in. He explains that David will be ready for battle and that he should wait until all the rest of the rebel forces have assembled. Then he will be able to defeat David and his loyalists with ease. Absalom is convinced. He rejects Ahitophel's wise advice. David quickly takes advantage of the reprieve. He crosses the Jordan with his men and prepares to do what he does better than anyone else: fight. His men, divided into 3 camps, prepare to attack. But counter to all military logic, before they go to battle, David forbids them to harm the leader of the revolt himself. He orders Joab ben Zuriah to keep his son Absalom alive. Joab pretends that he will obey, but in his mind, he has already decided Absalom must die. So long as he lives, David and his reign will be in danger. Once the battle begins, David's superiority as a military strategist becomes clear. The rebels are defeated, and Absalom flees from Joab's soldiers, galloping into a nearby forest. Here, the long hair in which he took so much pride betrays him. His hair gets caught in the branches of a tree, and the mule he is riding gallops off without him. While Absalom hangs helplessly between heaven and earth, Joab thrusts 3 spears into his heart. It is a brilliant victory for David as a fighter and commander. On the verge of destruction, he has managed to turn the tables on his enemy, suppress the rebellion, and regain his throne. But as a father, David has suffered the worst defeat of his life. The king was overcome with anguish. He wept up to the chamber, over the gate, and wept. And as he went, he said, "O my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you, Absalom, my son, my son."